Welcome back to Vanished Americana. If you find yourself yearning for a time when life felt a little more straightforward, when communities were tightly knit, and when the quiet, unyielding wisdom of our grandparents guided the daily rhythms of the household, please make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. We are passionately dedicated to uncovering the forgotten history, the lost habits, and the fascinating daily realities of the 20th century. Your support helps us keep these vital, fading memories alive for future generations to understand. Today, we are walking down the narrow hallway of the quintessential mid-century home, stepping onto the cold ceramic tile of the bathroom and opening the heavy white enameled metal door of the 1950s medicine cabinet. If you were a child growing up during this incredibly unique era, you already know that opening that small mirrored door released a highly specific, utterly unforgettable wave of scents that instantly defined childhood sickness. It was a sharp, aggressive, heavily medicinal blend of strong camphor, pungent rubbing alcohol, metallic iodine, and chalky, bitter powders that seemed to hang permanently in the humid air of the room. Today, if you open a modern bathroom cabinet, you are greeted by a very different, highly sanitized reality. You will find brightly colored, tamper-proof plastic bottles with push-and-turn child safety caps, gentle homeopathic remedies, fruit-flavored gummy vitamins, and digital thermometers that beep reassuringly at you within seconds. We currently live in an age of intense medical anxiety, where we immediately consult the internet or speed dial a pediatrician for every minor ache, phantom pain, or slight elevation in body temperature. But in the 1950s, the medical hierarchy of the American home operated under a completely different, remarkably self-contained paradigm. The absolute, unquestioned medical authority in the house started and ended with the mother. She was not just a homemaker, she was the undisputed resident pediatrician, the rigorous triage nurse, and the master pharmacist, all rolled into one highly capable, fiercely protective woman wearing a floral apron. It is crucial to view this not through the judgmental lens of modern medicine, but as a fascinating, sometimes shocking historical window into how an entire generation survived. Back then, picking up the heavy rotary telephone to call the actual family doctor or making a physical trip to the clinic was a rare, relatively expensive event reserved strictly for the most dire emergencies. A badly broken bone protruding through the skin, a fever that absolutely refused to break after 3 days, or a severe, terrifying infectious disease. Everything else, from deep lacerations to chest colds to stomach flus, was handled strictly in-house with a formidable arsenal of home remedies that were unapologetically harsh, incredibly direct, and deeply trusted because they had been reliably passed down through generations of women who had survived far worse. The mid-century mother did not have the time, the financial resources, or the cultural inclination to pamper a minor ailment. She operated on the fundamental, deeply ingrained belief that if a medicine tasted absolutely terrible, or if an antiseptic stung your skin to the point of bringing tears to your eyes, it simply meant that the remedy was aggressively and successfully fighting the sickness. The worse it felt, the better it was working. There was a profound collective resilience required of the children in that generation. We simply did not complain about every minor scrape, bruise, or sniffle, primarily because we knew exactly what terrifying concoctions were waiting for us behind that heavy mirrored cabinet door. Furthermore, this was an era heavily shadowed by the very real, paralyzing fear of diseases like polio. Before the widespread distribution of the vaccine in the mid-50s, mothers lived with a quiet, constant terror during the summer months, vigilantly watching their children for any sign of a stiff neck or a sudden fever. Because the stakes were so incredibly high in the outside world, the control they exerted over minor illnesses inside the home was absolute. The remedies of the mid-century were absolutely not designed for your comfort. They were designed for your raw survival. And as we look back today at the heavy glass bottles, the sharp metal tins, and the strange, brightly colored, often toxic liquids that defined our childhood sicknesses, we have to deeply marvel at the sheer, unvarnished toughness of the kids who lived through it and the fierce, uncompromising love of the mothers who administered it. We survived an era of medicine that would make a modern parent faint, and we wear those memories as a profound badge of honor. If there is one universal defining badge of honor that united almost every single child who grew up in the 1950s and 60s, it was the bright, glowing, aggressively neon red stain painted across a badly scraped knee. To understand the necessity of this, you have to understand the landscape of a 1950s childhood. This was an era of ultimate unsupervised free-range freedom. The moment the sun came up during the summer, the heavy wooden screen door slammed shut and children were ejected into the neighborhood, strictly instructed not to return until the streetlights began to hum and flicker on in the evening. We spent our entire days running recklessly on hard concrete sidewalks, building incredibly dangerous tree houses out of scrap wood and rusty nails, and strapping heavy metal roller skates to our leather shoes, racing down steep asphalt hills without a single helmet, knee pad, or piece of safety gear in sight. Consequently, violently skinned knees, deeply scraped elbows, and bloody palms were a daily, unavoidable, almost mundane reality. And when you inevitably took a hard fall on the gravel, tearing the skin off your knee, you had to make the agonizingly slow, tearful walk back through the back door. Your mother would take one look at the damage, sigh, sit you up on the edge of the porcelain bathtub, and reach for the most iconic, visually striking, and universally feared item in her entire medical arsenal, Mercurochrome, or its equally terrifying cousin, merthiolate. Affectionately and sometimes morbidly referred to by kids on the school playground as monkey blood, this bright, unnatural neon red liquid was not gently sprayed from a painless aerosol can. It was applied using a small, delicate glass wand that was physically attached to the inside of the bottle's black plastic cap. The mother would dip the glass wand into the dark liquid and dab it directly, unapologetically, straight into the open, bleeding wound. The ensuing sting was absolute legendary. It was a sharp, biting, fiery pain that shot straight up your leg and made you instantly suck in the air through your tightly clenched teeth. You gripped the edge of the bathtub until your knuckles turned white, but it was a pain you were firmly expected to endure with quiet, stoic bravery. Crying only made the process take longer. For days or even weeks afterward, you walked around the neighborhood with a fluorescent red patch on your leg, a highly visible, undeniable testament to your childhood adventures and your mother's aggressive medical care. Today, Mercurochrome is entirely banned in the United States and many other developed countries across the globe, primarily because it contained active, real mercury. To modern medical sensibilities, the idea of intentionally painting a child's open bloodstream with a heavy metal is considered an unthinkable hazard. But back then, it was universally considered an absolute miracle antiseptic. It was the trusted, impenetrable barrier between a dirty, gravel-filled sidewalk scrape and a serious, potentially life-threatening blood infection. And the reliance on terrifying, fragile glass instruments absolutely did not stop with the monkey blood. When you felt a sudden chill coming on or your face flushed with heat, your mother didn't gently point a plastic infrared laser at your forehead for half a second. She reached for the classic heavy, incredibly delicate glass mercury thermometer. Taking a temperature in the 1950s was a high-stakes, stressful ritual. The thermometer had to be violently shaken down with a sharp flick of the wrist, a move every mother had perfected. Then, it was placed carefully under your tongue. You had to sit perfectly, rigidly still on the couch for what felt like an absolute eternity, usually a full 3 to 5 minutes, holding this fragile tube of glass and highly toxic, silvery liquid in your mouth. You were strictly, repeatedly warned never, ever to bite down, a grim warning that instilled a quiet, profound fear in every child. We all knew a kid whose cousin allegedly bit a thermometer and swallowed the mercury, a playground urban legend that kept us frozen in place. If the thermometer accidentally slipped and shattered on the hard bathroom tile, it shattered into a million sharp pieces, and the liquid mercury would bead up and roll across the floor like tiny, mesmerizing silver flying saucers. We look back now and shudder at the idea of handing a small, squirming child a literal glass tube of liquid heavy metal to hold in their mouth. But in the mid-century, it was simply the unquestioned gold standard of diagnostic care. It was a time before the widespread luxury of safe, disposable plastics. You learned very early on to deeply respect the heavy glass tools of the household, and you learned that the process of healing was a serious, physically demanding, and sometimes uncomfortable ordeal. When the vibrant colors of autumn faded and the cold, bitter, unforgiving winter months finally rolled into the 1950s suburbs, the household medicine cabinet underwent a dramatic, necessary transition. It shifted away from dealing with the external summer scrapes and bruises and aggressively geared up to fight the dreaded, deep-seated, heavy chest colds that plagued drafty mid-century homes. The undeniable, undisputed king of the 1950s winter medical arsenal was a heavy, dark blue glass jar of Vicks VapoRub. The overwhelming, eye-watering scent of strong eucalyptus, menthol, and thick camphor is permanently, inextricably hardwired into the deepest memories of anyone over the age of 60. But the 1950s mother did not just apply a small, polite, modern dab of this ointment under the nose. She treated it like industrial-grade spackling paste. If you developed a hacking cough, a thick, greasy, heavy layer of Vicks was vigorously and forcefully rubbed onto your chest, deeply massaged into your back, and following a widely accepted and somewhat baffling folk remedy that millions of grandmothers fiercely swore by. It was heavily slathered onto the bare soles of your feet before thick, itchy wool socks were forcefully pulled over them to trap the vapors. You went to bed smelling like a walking pine forest, your heavy flannel pajamas permanently stained with the greasy residue. But Vicks, despite its overwhelming odor, was generally considered the gentle, comforting option. If the chest cold settled in too deeply, threatening to turn into pneumonia, the mother immediately escalated the treatment to something far more severe, something that felt like it belonged in the dark ages, the dreaded, infamous mustard plaster. This was not something you bought pre-made at a pharmacy. This was a home-mixed, highly volatile paste made from potent dry mustard powder, flour, and water, spread thickly onto a piece of old cotton cloth and placed directly, heavily onto the sick child's bare chest to physically draw out the sickness and break up the congestion. The chemical reaction generated a fierce, intense, rising heat that would literally, physically burn and blister the skin if it was left on for even a few minutes too long. You lay there trembling in your bed, your chest glowing an angry, fiery red and radiating intense heat, staring at the ceiling and praying for the exact moment your mother would finally return to peel the burning poultice off your skin. It was incredibly harsh, it was undeniably primitive, but the sheer overwhelming physical shock of the heat often successfully broke the chest congestion. And then, looming over the entire season like a dark cloud, there was the spoon. The heavy, cold silver tablespoon that delivered the daily preventative horrors of the mid-century era. Long before the brilliant invention of sweet, fruit-flavored, chewable gummy vitamins shaped like cartoon characters, children of the 50s were lined up in the kitchen every single morning to receive a massive, overflowing spoonful of castor oil or pure, unflavored, highly pungent cod liver oil. The texture was incredibly thick, viscous, and gag-inducing, and the taste was an oily, overwhelmingly fishy nightmare that aggressively coated the back of your throat and stubbornly lingered for hours, ruining your breakfast. It was given as a general, all-purpose tonic, a magical cure, all meant to keep the bowels constantly moving, clean out the system, and keep the immune system fortified against the winter chill. You pinched your nose shut as hard as you could, squeezed your eyes tightly closed, and swallowed the thick oil down as fast as humanly possible, because there was absolutely no room for debate or negotiation in a 1950s kitchen. You didn't get a sugary, colorful treat or a sticker afterward. Your only reward was simply the grim knowledge that you had done exactly what was required to stay strong and survive the winter. It was a visceral, daily, unpleasant reminder that maintaining your health was not a pleasant, consumer-driven luxury, but a harsh, necessary discipline maintained by the vigilant, unwavering, and sometimes terrifying authority of the mid-century mother. Perhaps the absolute most shocking realization for modern, safety-conscious parents looking back at the contents of the 1950s medicine cabinet is the sheer, unadulterated pharmaceutical strength of the ingredients that were casually, legally available right over the counter and routinely given to small children without a second thought. We currently exist in a highly litigious, heavily regulated world where extensive warning labels dictate every single drop of medicine, detailing every possible side effect. But the mid-century home was a vastly different, almost unimaginably wild medical landscape. When a young baby was aggressively crying through the night, screaming from the intense pain of new teeth breaking through their gums, there were no cooling plastic chew toys kept in the freezer, and there were no mild FDA-approved numbing gels. Instead, it was a widely accepted, incredibly common, and culturally endorsed practice for a mother or grandmother to simply dip her index finger straight into a glass of strong whiskey, bourbon, or brandy and forcefully rub the raw liquor directly onto the infant's swollen, bleeding gums. The alcohol acted as an immediate, heavy, localized anesthetic, and the small amount ingested usually put the baby straight to sleep. To a modern, 21st century pediatrician, this sounds like absolute reportable madness, but in the 1950s, it was just standard neighborly advice casually passed over the backyard chain-link fence. Furthermore, when a persistent, rattling, hacking cough kept the entire household awake at night, the heavy glass bottles of cough syrup pulled from the very top shelf of the medicine cabinet were practically industrial strength. Many of these thick, dark, sweet-tasting syrups routinely contained heavy, powerful ingredients like codeine, paregoric, chloroform, and other potent sedatives and opiates that have long since been heavily restricted, strictly prescribed, or outright banned for pediatric use. These vintage medicines didn't just gently suppress the minor tickle in your throat, they effectively knocked you completely unconscious until the sun came up the next morning. The medical objective of the era was absolute, undisturbed rest by any means necessary, and the medicines delivered that rest with unapologetic chemical brute force. There was a profound, unspoken, and absolute trust in the medical establishment and the local community. When the neighborhood pharmacist, a man who likely knew your parents by their first names and remembered when you were born, poured a dark, thick liquid into a generic brown glass bottle and typed out a simple label on a manual typewriter, questions were rarely, if ever, asked. The complex chemical ingredients were rarely scrutinized by the mother because the assumption was always that the experts simply knew best. We look back at these specific practices today. The toxic mercury smeared on our knees, the raw liquor for teething babies, the heavy narcotic sedatives for a common winter cold, and it genuinely feels like looking at the archival footage of an alien planet. But it is absolutely crucial to remember the historical context and the profound love that drove the era. These mid-century parents were doing exactly what their own parents had done before them. They were utilizing the very best, most effective tools available to them at the time to fiercely protect the families they deeply loved. They navigated a post-war world with far less medical safety netting, relying heavily on their own intuition, generational tradition, and an incredibly strong stomach. The undeniable fact that an entire massive generation successfully survived the scraped knees painted with heavy metals, the physically burning mustard plasters, the gag-inducing spoonfuls of fish oil, and the whiskey-soaked gums is a brilliant, undeniable testament to the sheer, stubborn resilience of the human body. We may have rightfully thrown away those old, dangerous glass bottles and banned those terrifying chemicals, but we should never, ever lose the profound, deep-seated respect for the mothers who stood bravely in front of that heavy metal cabinet in the middle of the night, doing everything in their formidable power to keep us safe, healthy, and alive in a much harsher, more unforgiving world. Thank you for joining me in the archive today. Please leave a comment below telling us which of these terrifying vintage remedies you personally remember enduring the most, and I will see you in the very next episode of Vanished Americana.